Agreeing on a spending plan, lawmakers and the governor.
This budget is a real winner for K-12 education, for our universities, for our kids, for our teachers.
A budget that pumps more money into education, but it doesn't satisfy everyone.
We are consistently denying our schools $1 billion every year.
Plus an unlikely path to the classroom. This is Arizona Week. Hello, and thanks for joining us. This week, Arizona lawmakers end the 2017 legislative session, a $9.8 billion plan for next year. Among the big-ticket items, education funding. Arizona Public Media's Christopher Conover traveled to Phoenix this week for a one-on-one interview with Governor Doug Ducey.
This budget is a real winner for K-12 education, for our universities, for our kids, for our teachers. We took all the available dollars. I think sometimes people forget that just a few short years ago, we were in a deficit as a state. We had a $1 billion deficit. We had to make some very difficult decisions in that first year to balance that budget. Now we're investing again, we're spending again, and we've got nearly $170 million additional dollars for K-12 education over and above inflation, $63 million committed directly to teachers. And this is all on top of Proposition 123, which was $3.5 billion guaranteed over the next 10 years. And we've been able to do all of this additional spending and investing without raising taxes. It's going to be very positive for education, going to be very positive for our kids, our teachers, and that doesn't even touch on universities yet.
When it comes to the budget, you mentioned university funding. It seemed like that was the big sticking point. You stuck to your guns. You wanted that money. The legislature came up with it in a different way. Is it the right solution, or is it just the compromise solution?
No, I would say it's the right solution. For me, this was about resources and dollars to our universities. We have great universities in this state. You know, the University of Arizona, ASU, NAU. We are among the fastest growing states in the country. We have the fastest growing county in the country in our state, and these universities are growing. So if we're going to be bringing these kids through the K-12 system that's ever improving and they're getting better results, we want to have universities that can bring them in, and we want to have the infrastructure that can address 21st century needs in terms of research, laboratory investment, etc. And that's what this is going to do. It's going to allow our university presidents to plan ahead, to focus on the excellence of their enterprise, to keep doing what they're doing, but to do more of it and faster.
When it comes to K-12 teachers, in your State of the State address, you asked for a raise over a couple of years. The legislature moved up that timetable speed-wise, but we still have a shortage. How do we get teachers to stay in the state?
One, we have some great teachers in this state, and I want to give our teachers an incredible amount of credit. We want to get them even more money. You know, Arizona is improving faster than any other state in math, reading, and science. We're making larger gains than other states in the country, and that is because of the quality of our teachers. We're having a teacher shortage in Arizona. It's not just Arizona. This is happening across America. People that are my age, many of them came out of school and wanted teaching. They've been doing it for about 30 plus years. They want to go into retirement. They've earned that retirement. We want to keep our good teachers in the classroom. We want to attract young people into the classroom. And then we did another good thing in terms of accreditation. We let subject matter experts that have experience, that are in the private sector, come in and at least present themselves to a principal or a superintendent to help fill that need to teach classes at both the grade school and high school level. So we're addressing this. There's more we can do. We also want to forgive debt for students that are in college and want to put their career into teaching. So we're going to add different tools to the toolbox along with raises and resources that we think will help mitigate this problem.
In your State of the State, the Teachers Academy, that was part of the budget. The legislature passed it with the three universities working together to get teachers out and in the same direction.
Absolutely. I mean, we went to the universities and we said, we educate these children. Many of them go into law or medicine or business, and in a short amount of time, they're making a significant salary. We want to improve teacher salaries, but there's a burden in terms of room and board and tuition and debt that's taken on. What can we work together on to help lessen that burden so it makes, if they have that passion, people don't go into teaching for the money, but they work incredibly hard. They deserve to be rewarded. And if we can take that debt or some of that debt away from the tuition perspective, perhaps we can attract even more good people to come into that profession.
Early in the session, we had the Empowerment Scholarship Bill filed, what some people call vouchers. It's expanded it pretty much to all kids, depending on the amount of money available. Critics say it's only going to go to the rich kids who are already in private school, especially because a lot of private schools cost more than the $5,000 that are available. Is that a valid argument?
No, I think that's inaccurate. This is a law that existed since 2011. It's helping foster kids, it's helping disabled kids, it's helping kids on tribal nations and children of military families. There's less than 5,000 children that are taking advantage of this, but they need this. Their parents need this choice. There's other kids that aren't in those same situations that also need this choice. This is a good idea. It's a very small reform, but for people that need it, it can be a lifesaver. This can be for tuition, for textbooks, for tutoring, for educational therapy. The best way to think of it is it's an educational savings account that gives the power to the parent so that they can address the needs of their child. It's something Arizona's really shined in terms of educational choice. And Tucson was the founding of the basis school, and U.S. News and World Report says that Arizona has 5 of the top 10 public high schools in the nation. So we know how to educate a child here. School choice has been good for the state of Arizona. We need to do this more often in more areas with the same amount of attention to our district schools, our public charter schools, and when a parent has a special situations, ESAs can help.
I heard someone say that the empowerment scholarships, especially for kids with special needs, the original version of it, if you will, really in some ways is a condemnation of public schools, that public schools can't educate kids who are out of the norm. Is it a condemnation?
No, not at all. And I think this is the part of the problem, is that everyone wants to polarize this debate, is that everything is either right or wrong. How about leaving this decision to the parent? And we have options in the state of Arizona. How can you say to a parent of a disabled child that when you give them flexibility in the dollars, knowing the needs of their child, that would be a condemnation of public education? The idea of public education is to educate the public. Yet our kids come in different shapes and sizes and different circumstances. And what we do in Arizona is we acknowledge that, and we give as much power as we can to the parent to make the right decision for their child.
Your predecessor, Governor Brewer, recently came out and said maybe she shouldn't assign some of the tax cuts that she did. Maybe the state needs that money. You've put forward a lot of tax cuts. You're a businessman before you were here in state government. What's your thought on the former governor's feelings on tax cuts?
Well, my focus is, how do I bring business to our state? How do I bring companies to our state? How do I make sure that everyone that wants to get a job in the state of Arizona can find a job? In this very office, this is where I meet with a lot of business people from other states, oftentimes from California and Illinois, that are looking to relocate or expand or bring their supply chain. They all want to know what the tax climate is in the state and what it's going to look like in the future. We've won more than our fair share of those discussions and negotiations in the last 28 months. The fact that we're a low-tax, light regulation state that's improving in K-12 education has allowed me to really pitch to these people that are making those decisions. I think that we can make our state more attractive for business and continue to invest in education as long as we're growing in terms of population and economic development, and that's my plan.
You mentioned unemployment. Numbers are looking better. We're still a little behind the national average. How do we fix this?
Well, we keep doing what we're doing. You know, we're a growth state, so when the economy is going good in the country, it's better in Arizona. When the economy suffers a downturn nationally, it hurts Arizona more. But we're out of the job losses that we had since the Great Recession. Now we're adding jobs, growing faster than we have or than anyone else is in the country. That's what will bring the economy back. You know, in southern Southern Arizona, Comcast, Caterpillar, what we've been able to do with the University of Arizona in terms of infrastructure, the relationship with Davis-Monthan and Raytheon, all real positives, all very much focused on that we're going to be bigger than one county in this state or one city. I've really enjoyed the visits to Southern Arizona. I think I've been there 30 plus times this week. And much of our budget, much of our focus has come from listening to the citizens around the state. And we've really had a focus on economic development in Southern Arizona.
Wrapping up your third legislative session as governor, what's left? We assume you're running again, but what's left on the horizon?
These campaign cycles are far too long. We have another legislative agenda that we'll have in January, another state of the state, and then there is a date for decisions in 2018. I think it's too early to talk about that. We'll talk about that at the appropriate time. What we want to do is close up this session, sign this budget, and begin to put the plans together so that we can have another successful legislative session and state of the state in January.
Despite additional pay for teachers and money for the classrooms, more than a dozen education advocacy groups say lawmakers failed the more than 1 million children in Arizona schools. Arizona continues to rank among the lowest in the country for school funding. Jen Darland represents Arizona Schools Now.
The biggest concern is that this is a continuation of the status quo. We had money available in the budget to do a big, bold investment in what we do know really drives results in the classroom, which is having a qualified, certified teacher in front of the students. And unfortunately, the priorities in this budget don't support keeping teachers in the classroom. So we're really disappointed in that wasn't necessarily the big, bold next step that we had anticipated following the passage of Prop 123.
It seemed before the budget passed that there was some hope that perhaps there would be something that advocacy groups like you're involved with would be happy with or happier with.
Yes. We had a great deal of hope, if for no other reason than to have a budget proposal which we put forward, which found the available dollars and found 3 other revenue sources that did not require a tax increase. We had hoped that what it would do is it would provide a moderating component, right? So that it would push from the 0.4% as the governor had proposed, not necessarily a full 4%. We were really kind of hoping for a bolder, close to a 2% this year, but really had hoped that the 4% would have come through in the end. We thought that we know that we had a lot of public support behind us, but unfortunately we just didn't have the champions in either of the chamber to kind of see that through.
We often hear that money cannot solve all the problems. Is that what Arizona needs for education right now?
I would say that the money is the significant problem. We have a revenue problem in the state of Arizona, even as recently as yesterday in the reports that even Governor Brewer feels like some of the tax cuts are just a little too extreme. We are consistently denying our schools $1 billion every year, funding that they need for 21st century tools and resources as well as safe classrooms. We know that that's also impacting the ability for school governing boards to make decisions over providing teacher raises or keeping an HVAC system working or having doors that actually lock. We heard from a teacher actually in Southern Arizona at one of our budget public hearings that her classroom door does not lock. So in a lockdown situation, she has to take her class of 30 students into her colleague's classroom to lock the door. And when we get down to the basics of not being able to ensure that our classrooms are secure, we've got a problem. So our perspective is that there's a revenue problem, but there's also just sort of a prioritization of ways to strategically invest to ensure that we have quality educational programs for our kids and for our families.
Who's responsible? Should more attention be given to the school boards to say, distribute this money more fairly, because it can't necessarily all be placed on the state?
Well, respectfully, governing boards are given the budgets from the state legislature. Governing boards do not have the power of the purse. That is a power entrusted to our elected leaders by our state constitution. Governing boards are strictly beholden to appropriating funds for their district, and they are elected and entrusted by local citizen body to properly and strategically invest to match the priorities of their community. I think that it is passing the buck for elected leaders to place blame on elected governing boards who were not paid. They were there as volunteers. And they want nothing more than to properly compensate teachers, and they want nothing more than to ensure that their facilities are safe and 21st century equipped. But unfortunately, when they're facing the budget where we have either rolled over $900 million annually, or we have suspended over $300 million for K-12, what are they left to do? They're doing the very best that they can.
What does Arizona look like if more money were pumped into the classrooms?
I think that Arizona starts to look like a true economic powerhouse. I think that we have 3 amazing universities. We have a wonderful climate in which we can be experimenting on renewable energy sector, which seems to be even a growing interest. I think people are willing to invest in that. I think we have a perfect climate for families. I think that we could attract, and I don't even think it, I know it. I know business leaders have communicated to local organizations and chambers and folks who are trying to recruit them here, saying, listen, you've got the perfect golf courses, you've got the great tax climate, but at the end of the day, if you don't have a properly funded education system, I can't bring people here, and I can't ask people to raise their children here. I think that we could actually be on the verge of being a leader in the nation.
The budgetary plan presents a challenge for the Pima County Superintendent's office. Managing resources and needs are 2 of the top concerns. Here's Ricky Hernandez, the Chief Financial Officer.
In Pima County, when it comes to just school districts alone, we're talking well over 200 public schools. That includes even our charter schools here in Pima County. So we're talking about a substantial amount of kids, well over 140,000 kids just in public school alone here in Pima County.
A lot of the times people wonder how schools in the North Foothills or Eastern Pima County have things that kids on the South Side don't have. Can you explain how that really works? I mean, the tax base, it's all different.
And that's part of it, is that we have a lot of different elements going on throughout Pima County. I mean, from, like you alluded to, the Catalina Foothills area and the eastern part of Tucson, like in the Tanque Verde area, you have certain opportunities, and you have a tax base that is very different to people who live maybe out in 3 Points or down on South 12th Avenue in the Sunnyside area. So they have to make decisions as a community through their elected governing boards on what are the priorities for their kids and their schools in those areas of town, to really think about what they want to accomplish in terms of the education programs for the students there.
Now help me understand, because I know the state constitution requires one thing, and then individually, school districts have very important decisions to make. So who ultimately is the deciding factor?
Really, the ultimate deciding factor is our locally controlled school boards. I mean, they are elected by their community members, by their voters, by their peers to represent the interests of those communities. Our state elected leaders obviously set a direction and a tone for what public education should look like in the state. But ultimately, the responsibility is for our local elected officials to really make that decision on what they want to have happen in their particular community in Pima County.
Where's the boundary, the balance then with what the state constitution mandates? Because it is very clear, and that's why we have the lawsuit that came out last week.
And I think that boundary really is something that is, that line in the sand is what kind of way we look at it, is really set by our statewide elected leaders. Locally, we're going to make decisions that are important to our community, to our kids, our teachers, our schools. But if we receive specific direction from our state legislature or from our governor that says these are the priorities and this is what we think you should be doing, we're going to follow those to the best of our ability within the confines of the resources that we have. Making a decision over teacher pay versus classroom technology, for example, for a student, those things are not mutually exclusive. I mean, they're just as equally important to have a highly effective and well-paid, well-compensated teacher, just as much as a well-resourced student to be able to be academically successful.
There are some tough decisions you have to make sometimes.
There are very difficult decisions that we have to make, like I alluded to before. Sometimes we get into the conversation about, how important is it to give a teacher a 1% versus a 4% raise while we have a crumbling school building, or maybe we have a lack of a textbook or a lack of a computer lab, for example, in any one of the schools in Pima County. And those decisions are very difficult to make, because how do you make them in a way that you can say we value X versus Y? And that's the toughest part of the job.
What are some of those things that you factor into those tough decisions, like teacher raise or textbooks?
So we have to take a look at, obviously, when it comes to textbooks, for example, and educational materials, we have to take a look at changing standards. If we are moving away from specific standards, do our materials align properly to those standards to make sure that our students are learning what they're supposed to be and achieving what they're supposed to be doing? At the same time, trying to retain teachers. The biggest problem right now that we're having with teachers is not just recruitment, but retention of the teachers that we do have. And what do we do in order to make sure that we're keeping those teachers well compensated, well prepared, and making sure that they continue to be well supported in the classroom?
Among the bills passed and signed this legislative session, loosening requirements to get qualified people teaching in the classroom. It's reported there are approximately 2,000 teacher vacancies throughout the state. Governor Ducey says school districts, not the State Board of Education, should decide who's qualified. At St. Augustine High School, there are a handful of teachers with other work experiences who are teaching. David Oboyski teaches and serves as the admissions counselor and marketing coordinator.
I graduated from college back in '90, and my first job out of college, I worked for the CIA as an intelligence analyst. I was an intelligence officer. And I did that for a couple of years and went into marketing and public relations after getting my education degree, and did that for about 15, 20 years, and found my way back to education again.
How did those careers help you become a teacher?
I would say one of the things that CIA did that helped me tremendously was presentation skills. I was trained to be able to digest information very quickly, organize it in my head, and then present it off the top of my head to top-level policymakers, foreign intelligence services. I did briefings for 2 people to 100 people, and that helped a lot when I got into education, especially with working with high schoolers, toughest audience that you can ever deal with.
How did you handle colleagues in schools who were a little, wondering, can you do what I do given that your background is different?
That's a tough one. Most people were open to it, or at least skeptical in a hidden way, because they just don't know. They don't know what you do, what you did. I'd like to say that it's a true conception of, you're like a Superman because you work for CIA, and which is not the case. Most teachers want first to know that their colleagues are going to keep control of the class. Because if you're not keeping control of your class, you're feeding them, especially at the high school level, you're passing them along out of control to the next class. If you can do that, and then you can teach on top of it, then they love you. And that was just a matter of time, showing that I was competent, that I was able to teach, that I was able to engage the students and make connections with them. You
left the CIA and marketing for the classroom.
I did. God made me, is how I talk about it as a Catholic school teacher and an administrator. I was doing very well, making very good money. I had always thought that if I could get a good nest egg and retire a little early, I'd love to go back to the classroom again. But I think we called it the golden handcuffs. It would have been just too much of a drop to be able to support my family to leave. But fortunately, God had a recession in mind, and I got laid off right at the start of the recession. I was out of work for 5 years, and it was devastating to my family. But I had to find some ways to make money, so I had an education degree. I went back and subbed. And funny, given the topic we're discussing, certification was one of the issues. We were living in Kansas at the time. I had been in business for 20 years. I had been a CIA intelligence officer. I had a degree in education. I had been eligible to be certified when I graduated, but never got to do it because I didn't land in a job. But in order for me to get certified to be a full-time teacher other than a substitute in Kansas, I would have had to go back to school for another year to get certified. I couldn't afford that at the time, and so I could only substitute teach. And so when we came out to Arizona, I was able to get a certificate here, and then I was able to take just a couple of tests and 1 or 2 courses that I could take through Pima or somewhere else just to plug a couple of gaps, and able to get back and get my certification so I could teach again. But it was a lot of hoops to jump through. And I'd love to tell you that by doing that, I was a much better teacher, but I would say that the correlation between certification and quality I'm biased, I think I'm pretty good, but I don't think that it added that much. But those were the hoops we had to jump through, and I did, and I got to teach. So.
Wouldn't it have been a shame if someone with your background, your experience would have been discouraged by all those hoops and then never been in the classroom to share your rich experience with these students?
I think we're missing out. I think when we put those barriers to entry, sorry I taught economics for a while, we're not allowing ourselves a rich enough gene pool of education and educators. It doesn't mean that anybody can walk in the classroom. That's obviously true. But it also means that there are people who have those gifts that with some shaping, some structure, some guidance, don't necessarily need to go through all of the pedagogical routine of college courses and teaching internships and things like that. They could do that on the job. There's ways to structure that. But with certification, right now that's not, I'm glad to see that the governor and the legislature decide to make that a little bit easier. And I don't think that they've watered the standards down so much. I mean, 5 years on the job in a profession related to what you're teaching is pretty substantial. It would have kept me out from CIA. I was only there for 2 years. Now, I probably had enough background in other areas that I could come in as a social studies teacher on the economics and other side of that. But I think it's a good thing. And I think we give students, especially at the secondary level, middle school and high school, having people who've had a lot of real world experience is a nice thing to add to the mix.
Other news this week, President Donald Trump firing FBI Director James Comey, a surprise to many, including Congressman Raul Grijalva. He's in Arizona this week meeting with constituents.
I think the involvement of Sessions, Trump, and this dismissal of Comey begins to smell very badly like a cover-up. It begins to smell very badly of people trying to cover their track and to put all that prosecutorial authority in the hands of Sessions so that nothing else moves. This is now why the call is for an independent counsel to investigate, an independent prosecutor to prosecute. If we're going to get to the bottom of this, I think that's going to be the only way. The Republicans in the Senate and the House are dragging their feet. They want to talk more about how the press got a hold of the information, a leak, than they want to talk about the real elephant in the room, which is the potential of Trump campaign and associates in working with Russia to influence and to try to twist our election in a certain way. I think we have to pursue that diligently because it smells.
More analysis with Congressman Grijalva on next week's program as we explore how the possible repeal of the Affordable Care Act could impact Arizona. And that's our program. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us.